So welcome everybody to this new webinar organized by the Institute for European Policy Making. For those who are new to our digital events, the YEP, as we call it, is a think tank which is hosted by Bocconi University and involves, there are many fellows, both from Bocconi and from other university. And the idea, which is an idea by the founder, Mario Monti, is to connect academic research and the policy debate, which are not always as connected as they should be. So we basically try to discuss hot topics with the rigor of academic research, but with the goal to have an impact as a think tank do. So in this series, we are basically trying to discuss and to create a conversation around very interesting pieces that we publish on our website. So I definitely recommend you to check out our website and also to subscribe our newsletter to stay informed on what we do. So a few weeks ago, we published an article by Partha Sen, who is an economist, and he has served as director of the Daily School of Economics, and he's a member of the CESIFO Munich Research Center, and he's an expert of macroeconomics, international economics, and environmental economics. So in this article of him, Partha basically discussed the CBAM, that is the second half of the carbon border adjustment mechanism of the carbon pricing approach of European Union to climate crisis. And he discussed this very interesting tool from from an emerging economy perspective, a very important emerging economy because he comes from India, but his objections are relevant for all the so-called global South. So we decided to organize this event, and Gianmarco Ottaviano, who is a YEP fellow and is one of the most well-known trade economists also he teaches in Bocconi University, he will chair the conversation, and he will discuss with also Kathleen Schubert, that I thank very much for joining us. She's a professor at the University of Paris Panthéon Sorbonne, and she's also a member of the French High Council for Climate and the French Economic Council for Sustainable Development. But for what is more relevant for us, she's one of the leading experts on carbon pricing and especially on CBAM. If you don't know what CBAM is exactly, I will leave the floor. I will give the floor to Gianmarco to drive us into the conversation, and just a couple of recommendations. We will have a time for Q&A after the speakers present what they want to say. So you can either write your question in the chat, which is like the default option, or otherwise you can raise your hand and ask for to say something with the mic. I see that there are many YEP fellows, so you're more than welcome to be part of the conversation after the speaker presented their part. So Gianmarco, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stefano, and thank you everybody who's here, the speakers and those who are connected. So today we are going to talk about CBAM, which is one of the several acronyms that the European Union and the European Commission like to create in order to identify different types of policies. And as all acronyms is a bit exotic or exoteric, if you want, for those who are not in the know. So I think the most important aspect is that the European Union has decided to move as fast as possible towards a climate transition, which means that all of us are some way incentivized and welcome to change in Europe our approach to our way of living and also our way of producing and creating wealth. And this is an important aspect because this means that there's going to be some costs associated with the transition, both for the citizens and for the firms that are operating in Europe. And these costs may create, at least in the short run, a disadvantage in terms of international competition, or at least this is the point of view of the European Union and the member states. In order to deal with that, at least as far as competition in the internal single market is concerned, Europe has devised a system which is called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is essentially a tax on imports that are associated with production that does not comply with the requirements for the climate transition in Europe. So this is the idea. And I would like Kathleen to explain more about this idea and the European motivation and what are the pros and cons of this approach. So thank you, Kathleen. I'm leaving it to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Slides. Is it okay? Do you see the slides?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect.
That's great.
Okay, so I'm going to explain a bit the mechanism of first the motivation and then the mechanism. So the motivation is very old, it's not new. It's the fact that if you don't price the externality of fossil fuel burning, it theoretically amounts to an export subsidy. Stiglitz already said that in 26, but it is not actionable at the WTO. So the idea would be to try to compensate for this export subsidy by putting a price on the carbon embedded in imported products, and Markussen explained that already in 1975. So the way you do it exactly can be very different. You can impose a custom duty, a tax, or regulations, diverse regulations to require importers to purchase emission allowances on the cap and trade market. So this is the idea of border carbon adjustments. The point is that it's really simple from the theoretical point of view. The idea is very old and simple, but the practical implementation is much more difficult. So it has multifaceted issues like the exact design, the fact that there are some countries that can put an implicit carbon in imported products. So what do you do with that? The fact that it may be or not WTO compatible, the fact that it may provoke different incentives, and you have to think about that. So the mechanism is really simple. When you put in place a tax, when you a price on carbon here, there are good effects and bad effects. The good effects, the desired result are on the supply side that you incentivize, you give a business model to green technologies. Okay, so it's good for low carbon production. You make firm substitute from brown technologies towards green technologies. So this is good. It reduces emissions. On the demand side, also consumers substitute. They are now going to use more green products. And also it's good. You reduce emissions. Of course, the undesired effect is exactly what we are interested in here. If the carbon policy, if the carbon price is a unilateral climate policy, if the other countries do not do that, the trade patterns are going to be impacted. The country that put in place the regulation or the carbon price is going to lose competitiveness. Okay, and so this is the effect that you don't like, actually. So first, maybe a small word about evidence, empirical evidence. So there are a lot of studies about pollution have an effect. The pollution have an effect. The fact that with a unilateral environmental policy, activities are going to be incentivized to go away of the regulated zone to countries that do not have an environmental policy. And so this is the pollution have an effect. So leakage, carbon leakage is just a special case of that. It's not very easy to assess the size of these effects because there are a lot of challenges for empirical analysis. Maybe I don't go into the details here. But when you look at reviews like this one by the Chez-Le-Prêtre and Sato, in the end, what you get is that competitiveness effects are very often small compared to other determinants of trade and firms' location choices. So the increase, the loss of competitiveness due to environmental policy is often small. So probably this pollution have an effect is not very, very important. When you look at ex-ante estimates by mostly computable general equilibrium model, they find non-negligible effects. And what they find is that these effects are highly sensitive to energy elasticities, highly sensitive to the substitutability between domestic and foreign goods, and also that the effects, the leakage effect, the leakage rate increases with the ambition of policy and decreases with the size of the coalition implementing unilateral climate policy. Okay, so this is quite intuitive, but these models highlight that very well. And also they show that the risk is higher for energy intensive and trade exposed products sectors. When we look specifically at carbon leakage effects within the EU ETS, so what is clear is that there is very limited evidence of carbon leakage so far. And there are two explanations. First, in the first 3 phases of existence of the EU ETS, there has been a vast overallocation of quotas. And so the carbon price has been low, and so the loss of competitiveness has been low as well. And also, the EU has taken measures to prevent competitiveness losses, mostly free allowances. So sectors subject to the EU ETS has been given free quotas. And so, of course, has decreased the adverse effects. So here I have put a list of recent references on that, mostly at the firm level. These papers, they investigate 2 channels of leakage. The channel I have explained, loss of competitiveness, market shares channel, but also another channel, the relocation channel, the fact that firms may just relocate somewhere else in a country without climate policy. Okay, and on these 2 channels, there is no evidence mostly. But of course, the carbon price has been low and there has been these free allowances. And so the point is, what is going to happen if Europe, now that Europe is becoming more ambitious on its climate policy, what is going to happen? So to come to the design of a BCA, clearly the design is a compromise between several things, at least 4. The environmental effectiveness of the border adjustment in preventing leakage, the economic effectiveness in preserving competitiveness, and also ensuring acceptability of domestic climate policy, because firms have to accept to pay for the carbon price. Compromise also on the point of technical feasibility of the implementation. We don't want it to be too complex, too much paperwork, and also finally WTO compatibility. So to go a bit more into the details of the design, different questions that have to be addressed. First, does the adjustment, has the adjustment to be on imports only or also on exports? Should we rebate exports for the carbon price that have been taken, that have been paid at home? So here the point seems clear. If the policy is to be an environmental policy and not a competitiveness policy, you just have to to tax imports, but not to rebate exports. This is what Europe has chosen to do. Second, the assessment of the carbon content of imported goods. How do you know how much carbon has been incorporated in the production process of these goods? The best would be to take into account real emissions, meaning real emissions incorporated in the production process. Real emissions are the emission of the production unit, not of the country, okay? But it's very difficult to get this information. How to incentivize sincere disclosure on that? This is what Europe is trying to do now, has tried to achieve, but clearly it's something very complex. And also in some papers, this risk of reshuffling has been pointed. What is it? It is the fact that in countries that are subject to CBAM, let's say India or China, they may very well want to target the cleaner production to Europe, okay, and keep the dirtier production to other markets that don't have border carbon adjustment. And so from the environmental perspective, from the climate point of view, the objective is not reached, okay, because production is going to be in these countries always as dirty as before. It's just reshuffling. Other thing that you can want to do if you think you are not going to get the information on real emissions, you can use average emissions intensity of the exporting country. It's not so good. And the drawback is mostly that it does not incentivize the least efficient exporting firms to reduce their emissions. Then you can use benchmark. So Europe is going is using a mix of the two, trying to take into account real emissions and using benchmarks when it is not possible. Then the scope. So there are traditionally in this literature 3 scopes that are distinguished. Scope 1 is direct emission from the production process of the good. Scope 2 is indirect emission, mostly from electricity used in the production process. So these Scope 2 emissions, they depend on the national energy mix. And Scope 3 are all other indirect emissions occurring along the value chain. Okay, so it includes transportation of goods. It includes what happens with stored goods and so on. So clearly, incorporating Scope 3 is very, very demanding, very difficult. Some remarks. So of course, the scope of the BCA has to be smaller than the scope of emissions covered by domestic climate policy, smaller or equal. And also, it's you have to deal with a trade-off between the administrative complexity of collecting information on direct and indirect emissions and the gain in terms of leakage. So there is a trade-off here. Now, the geographic scope. So just to come back to the scope. So Europe is including Scope 1 and Scope 2. I will show that a bit later. Now, geographic scope. So either all trade partners, or you would like maybe to exempt less developing countries, or you maybe would like to exempt countries that are able to demonstrate that they have an equivalent implicit carbon price. This is mostly what the US has asked for. The US say, okay, we don't have carbon tax, we don't have the equivalent of the ETS, but we have regulations that put on carbon an implicit price. We have to be exempted. Okay, Europe doesn't want to do that. At the moment, Europe, the geographic scope that has been agreed on is all trade partners. I don't want to be too long. I'm going to skip that. To come back a bit more precisely into the design of the border adjustments that has been implemented in Europe, the CBAM. So the current legislation is here. We are now in a transition phase. And then from 2026 on, it will be phase 1. So the emission covered are Scope 1 only for iron and steel and aluminium, Scope 1 and 2 for other products. The products are iron and steel, cement, electricity, fertilizers, aluminium, and hydrogen. So energy intensive, highly exposed to international trade products. In the future, the European Commission is planning to expand CBAM to additional sectors, coking coal, asphalt bitumen, petroleum products, chemicals, glass and ceramics, and non-ferrous metals. And in the future, the objective would be to incorporate Scope 3, meaning all other indirect emissions along the supply chain, and all products, maybe all products. Okay. And so when you go on the right of this line here, of course, you increase protection against leakage, but also you increase complexity, you increase paperwork, reporting burden, and so on. So in the transitional phase now, there is only reporting. So just to get importer used to the reporting job. Okay, so they have to report what is the carbon content of the products they import. Okay. So a detailed methodology has been published in August, and I have to admit that this is just like a nightmare. If you want to read it, it's hundreds of pages, and I think the importers are going to need to hire consulting firms to fill the papers they need to fill. It's very, very complex. What they have to do is that they have to declare the emission embedded in imports and surrender the corresponding number of certificate each year. This will be after the trial phase, and these certificates, the price of these certificates will be actually the price of the of carbon on the EU ETS. If importers can prove that the carbon price has been paid already during the production of the imported good in their country, the corresponding amount can be deducted. Very importantly, free allowances are going to be phased out in parallel with the phasing in of the CBAM after 2026. Okay, so that you don't protect twice local domestic firms. To conclude, yeah, maybe 2 or 3 remarks. What would have been the alternatives? So you see, CBAM, it's complicated, it's not panacea, but what would have been the alternative? Reallocation is not good either. Could CBAM be a first step towards a carbon club of, let's say, like-minded countries that would join to increase the ambition of climate policy? How to avoid trade wars and retaliations from the part of countries that are subject to CBAM. And finally, and this is, I think, what Parta is going to take about, how to make it fair in face of the different historic responsibilities of different countries in the climate change problem. An idea could be to redistribute CBAM revenues outside the EU, but it is not what is planned at the moment. At the moment, EU is going to keep the revenues, and also, of course, financial aid, technology transfer, debt service restructuring to the most affected FDCs. Thank you. I give the floor to Parta.
So thank you, Kathleen, very much. This has been very useful, and I think it has offered a balanced view of the difficulties and the challenges and opportunities of this system. And I mean, it's also highlighting some important aspects. So one I would like to highlight, and then I will leave the floor to Parta, is that the more the procedure, as you have stressed, becomes complicated and costly for the importers, the more it smells of protectionism. And so this is something that we should keep in mind in Europe, is that, I mean, this is really a no-go in a sense. But now I would like to leave the floor to Parta, that who is going to tell us on the other side of the border what are the feelings and what are the suggestions possibly for the future. So thank you, Parta. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gianmarco. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to listen to Kathleen summarizing the arguments, because she's made my job in expositing it easier. And also she uses border carbon adjustment rather than mixing the letters BCA versus CBA. And I used to write BCA. Now I think I need to see a shrink because it's I'm all split up. My personality is completely split. The other problem is that we are of course discussing WTO compatibility and things like that, but if Donald Trump is elected, as he thinks, for the 3rd time, then everything we are discussing could actually just fall through, because he's going to play havoc with WTO. So it could well be like Adam Smith saying that services perish at the very moment of their creation. So, all our discussion could be worth nothing. So anyway, having made those facetious comments, let me get down to this. You see, so far, it is an apprehension on the part of the more industrialized developing countries that this would be used as a protectionist tool. Okay, because it has not been implemented, the free allowances have not been phased out. So it's more of an apprehension. And of course, if the scope of CBAM is widened, then obviously more products come into play. And there are technical problems, and here I have to, listen to people who know these things better. That there's steel, for instance, you can infer a lot about the carbon content directly, whereas aluminium is not so easy. And then there is cement, where it's very difficult to decarbonize it, the production. So it's not so easy. So there are technical requirements. Having solved the problems that Kathleen alluded to, which is that there's scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So you have to draw and the borders, the cutoff points, and some cutoff points have been already drawn, in the sense that these are not on the final product; these are all intermediate inputs. Okay, so in terms of what I used to when I was a student many centuries ago, people used to talk about effective rates of protection, right? So you should not be taxing things, the intermediate inputs, but you should be taxing final this thing. But that's obviously for the ease of analyzing the carbon content, rather than because the final output has many components, and then it becomes very hairy to do that. So so there are some technical issues there, and then there are issues like WTO compatibility. Now, the WTO, we know, is kind of moribund today, because everything is going to be disputed. It's I think the Indian government always wakes up long after the event, but I think they are flexing their muscles, because in some sense it's the easiest way to do that. I mean, they don't necessarily believe in decarbonizing the hard way, or in promoting free trade. So they've finally woken up, and they're talking about WTO. But WTO, the tribunals are not functioning because they are not fully manned. So what will happen? My own reading of various WTO rulings is that the WTO up to this point, and I could be corrected on this, WTO up to this point has been okay with taxing, Article 20, you could make some exceptions, you could tax goods, but taxing processes is basically not something that the WTO looked very kindly at. But CBAM is all about taxing processes. So CBAM is not taxing goods, it's taxing processes. So, the tuna dolphin case is one of the earlier cases, and where the WTO tribunal came down heavily on the US, saying that, look, your catching of tuna, Mexico's catching of tuna cannot be related to your production. It has to be very clear. So I'm not sure which way this WTO analysis is going to go. And I'm also, WTO needs reform to deal with these issues. But given the way, the world is sort of fractured into various camps and anti-free trade sentiment, so the very reason for which WTO was set up, I think, is in jeopardy. So this would be, if not the final nail in the coffin, but another nail in the coffin. So, so those are issues that, you know, there are technical issues, there are legalistic issues. Which way they will go, I'm not sure. And as it's expanded, and there would be other issues. Now, let's just go back to the first principles that once the free allowances are dispensed with, the cost of production of carbon intensive goods would rise in Europe. And that would mean that if you have a CBAM in place, competitiveness in Europe is restored by quote unquote a level playing field. And it would, you know, it is helping decarbonization in Europe, and it is helping sort of imposing decarbonization in the rest of the world. So in some sense, the argument is that it would be good for climate change, fighting climate change. Now, it is, as we would say that, you know, as far as this partial equilibrium, the European market is concerned, it is kind of unexceptionable that this is what's happening, and that it would be good for Europe on all these three counts. Now, the question is that is it then fair to impose a tax on developing countries? And, you know, you can take the most carbon spewing developing countries like China, well, whether it's a fully, you know, whether it's identifies as a developing country today, I'm not sure, but say outside the EU. And I just in the piece that I circulated, which Stefan circulated, that I say that, look, the climate change, and it's important to at least flag it, if not to go on repeating it, that that the poorer countries did not create this problem, and at least until the Kyoto Protocol, it was clear that, you know, there was common but differentiated responsibilities that different countries faced in fighting climate change. Now, since Paris, that's been put on the back burner, but not quite eliminated, because the rich countries are supposed to transfer both finances and money and technology, and they have been not doing that properly. You know, I mean, the $100 billion has almost, you know, it's more in the breach than in meeting the target. And technology transfer is, to me, is at the heart of this issue. Why? Because you know, there are lots of papers, theoretical papers, and I think Kathleen might have written some of them, that says that this notion of a single carbon price in a multi-region world, you know, you can easily say that there should not be a single carbon price of production. So therefore, it is not very clear like that. But let me not get into those issues right now. But let me just say that, look, the third world, and this is true of India, India's steel production, there are cutting edge steel producers, and there are not so cutting edge steel producers. And what we have is that outdated technology, maybe carbon intensive outdated technology. So if there was some technology transfer, so, you know, if we were not so hung up on IPRs, on these production of these capital goods, then I think it would be much more of a level playing field, which would be my first preference, that, you know, we need cooperation, we need to fight climate change. And if you can, if some means, international means, obviously, of transferring technology were possible, then you could say that, yes, everyone should equate their marginal product carbon to this price of carbon. Okay, I mean, the marginal productivity conditions should hold. But right now, we are saddled with very poor technology where the marginal productivity is much lower, and to expect that we should pay a higher price for carbon, which the Europeans and the Americans pay, is not quite okay. So I will stop here, just emphasizing the fact that there are countries, there are governments which are not serious about climate change. I want cooperation across the various blocks to fight climate change, and I am proposing some kind of a cooperation mechanism. It's not costless, of course, nothing is costless, but it's certainly better than the Nordhaus kind of climate club, which is saying that either you are in or you are out. And at least the CBAM at least is more graded. So the CBAM, I mean, I have issues about what the tax is on, what is the reference technology in Europe, and what is the technology that they will choose in a country like India. But those are measurement issues. But I'm not at all in favor of either, as Kathleen said, free allowances or a carbon club. So I want cooperation, and I think that cooperation would, one way of getting cooperation would be some kind of a technology transfer so that it is a level playing field to start off with. Thank you.
So thank you so much. So clearly, what Partha has highlighted are aspects that Kathleen had already hinted to, but clearly with a much deeper concern and a broader overview of the point of view of emerging economies. And these are really important concerns because first of all, countries like India and China, Indonesia, and many other countries that are called now emerging economies, they've actually emerged already, and they have in perspective in the future will become more and more important from an economic point of view, which means that it will be more and more important in terms of production and possibly contribution to emissions. And so this is really highlighting that unless we find a way to design common goals and to share some of the cost, it would be hard to achieve anything with sort of actions, apart from the fact, as Partha mentioned at the beginning, that maybe elections in different parts of the world may change the political picture completely. So before taking questions from the floor, I would like to ask Kathleen if she has any comment on what Partha just mentioned.
Thank you. So I mostly agree with what you said. I have just one comment. So yeah, I think it's very, very important to increase transfers of money and of technology, of course, for sure. But I think that the global south is not not homogeneous. Okay, I think that China and very poor Africa countries are quite different. I wanted to show you just one thing, if I may. Zut. Excuse me. Just okay, so I've lost it. I wanted to show you. Okay, I have lost it. So, but the World Bank has done a very, very interesting study now to measure which countries are going to lose the most. Okay, and what is very striking is that the country that's going to lose the most to CBAM, as it is now, is Zimbabwe. Okay, Zimbabwe. Okay, it's clearly. It has no meaning to try to impoverish Zimbabwe a bit more by putting in place this kind of thing. Okay, China is not going to be affected so much, but Zimbabwe is the first. So it's striking. Okay, I think it's not possible to leave it like it. Okay. This was my main remark. Otherwise, I think I agree mostly with all what you said.
Yeah, I mean, this is very important. I mean, there is a lot of heterogeneity across countries in the south, both in the snapshot, or as economists say, the cross section. That is a given moment in time, that is now. But there's a lot of heterogeneity also in what economists call the time series. So the history of the different countries and the contributions they may have given to the situation, the global situation, common situation where we are now. And this is something that in terms of the way that so far the CBAM has been developed and introduced adds a layer of complexity that is crucial, but is making the entire mechanism even more unlikely to function smoothly, at least in the near future. Now we have, unless Partha, you want to say something more?
Just one thing, I fully agree that there is heterogeneity across countries, but there's also heterogeneity within countries. The Indian steel exports, on the one hand, you have companies like Tata and all, who jolly well should be able to afford the latest technology on their own, and they might just be piggybacking on the poorer thing. But a lot of it is, lot of steel is produced by very small firms. And, it's one thing in a introductory trade course to say that the government will look after them, and quite another to actually do it in a country like India. So, but that's right, and I'm with you that, one of the things why I am so passionate about fighting climate change is the other day I saw a Rolls-Royce stuck in traffic in Delhi, and the Rolls-Royce, in front of the Rolls-Royce was a bullock cart. So, that sort of gives you a picture of heterogeneity.
So thanks a lot. And I think now we have time to ask for questions from the people that have joined us today. And I would say that you can raise hands, as far as I can say, or let me, Stefano, how this is going to work.
Yes, if people want to raise their hands and to intervene, otherwise they can write in the chat. On my side, I just would like to ask Kathleen what she thinks about enforcement. Do you think that you will be able to enforce the CBAM? I mean, I read that some companies are saying that there are not enough verifiers in terms of people checking whether the content of emission is the emission content is exactly what people declare, what companies declare. I mean, what do you think about enforcement? That's on my side, but I ask also other people to take the floor and to ask questions. Thank you.
I think like always in enforcement issues, there is a trade-off between creating a huge bureaucracy that is going to check everything and not enforcing at all. So Europe has the tendency to create huge bureaucracies. So I don't know, basically, but for sure, finding the exact content or precise content of carbon within the production processes of imported goods is really very difficult. Yeah, the problem of enforcement is going to be acute, clearly.
Thank you so much. I see that there are many YEP fellows with expertise on these topics, so maybe they can raise their hand and intervene, or maybe Gianmarco, if you have other questions, just to warm up the audience. We still have 10 minutes.
Yes, I would like to zoom in. Oh, there is a question, actually.
There is a question. Please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, so many thanks. So first of all, hi everybody, I'm Paola Rocchi, and I work for the CMCC. and previously for the JRC. Just two quick points. The first one probably is a minor comment, but just to see that there will be also an impact on European consumers. So maybe we could take also this point into account. That is, I mean, the cost of the CBAM is going to be to a certain extent split. Also, consumers in Europe will have to pay a part of this policy. And my question is another one, that is, okay, let's assume that the starting point of the CBAM was the urgency of the climate crisis. Let's assume that, okay, and that the main aim of the CBAM is to try to get the ETS phasing out of the free allowances accepted at European level. So my question is, okay, what would be a realistic alternative given the urgency of the climate crisis and given the fact that we really need European industry to accept the phasing out of the free allowances of the ETS? I don't know if the question is clear. Thanks.
Maybe I
Maybe
can
we
say
can-
something.
Wait a second. Maybe we can collect 3 questions, and then we go for a final round of answers, because otherwise we have no time. So Eleonora and SG, whoever is SG.
And there is also a question in the chat.
Okay.
Hello, hi. I have, this is Eleonora Pintore. I actually work for DG for International Partnership at the European Commission. And I know this background is not conducive, but actually my comment is entirely personal. But I was really interested in the comment on technology transfer. Because when it comes to greening production, the bulk of how to reduce emissions in production is linked to energy production. And in this sense, there are technologies that are now well assessed, and especially when it comes to renewable energy, the cost is decreasing steadily. I mean, the most consolidated, such solar or wind. And so I wanted to understand what is the reference to technology transfer, and what can be, in your opinion, really the key to go ahead. Because when it comes to international cooperation, one of the axes that the European Commission has been using is to support the uptake of renewable energy and work together with our partner countries. So yes, I would like to hear a little bit more on the concept of technology transfer. Thank you very much.
Okay, final question by SG. If you can introduce yourself, because we cannot see who you are.
So while we see whether Professor Gupta can connect, there is this question on how to get the actual emission data from suppliers, and who will be responsible for the lack and mistaken data and related sanctions. This is a question by Isabella Loisio.
Yeah, can I speak? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I'm Shrikant Gupta from the Delhi School of Economics. So my question is actually addressed to Professor Sen. The 2 questions, and the second question is addressed to all of you. The first question is, what do you think is the likelihood of countries such as India retaliating to the CBAM? Because as you know, EU is India's largest trading partner. So what do you think is a possible fallout, particularly given the current political situation? We have a very right-wing kind of a government, which is quite muscular in its foreign policy, as you know. So that was my first question for Partha Sen. And my second question to all of you is, what do you think would be the implications of this for India-EU FTA? Will it derail this process? Those are my 2 questions.
Okay. Okay, final round of answers, and then we leave you to your lunch.
Yeah, so feel free to pick the questions that you feel more comfortable with. And so I guess Partha, you have some targeted questions, and other questions are really about the way the system works in Europe, and I mean the mechanism itself. So maybe we can start with Partha answering the last questions while Kathleen, sorry, prepares to the question raised by Isabella and the others.
You know, in some sense, the threat of retaliation, muscularity, is something that frightens me a little bit. You know, I think President Trump was very unreasonable in his attempts at interfering with free trade. But I think it is moving away from the free trade or trying to jettison the WTO is a race to the bottom. I do not want to the Indian government to take this very lightly, which they might, because, you know, as my colleague Shrikant said, that, you know, it's a very ideological government, so they might want to show the muscle power, but it's the thought of it actually fills me with dread. So I would like negotiations and reasonable outcomes before I would endorse anything like that. The other thing is that, yes, I mean, a free trade agreement, both India is pursuing with the EU and with the UK, could have some amount of technology transfer built into it. And, you know, it's after all, a free trade agreement could have some side payments, and technology transfers could be part of that. Now, the question is that, you know, what is this technology transfer we talk about? Because, you know, it's not just a question of producing renewables, which is, of course, a very important part of the thing, but it's a question of redoing the grid. It is a question of, you know, in the off hours when there is no wind or sun, what do you do? And so, you know, those costs are very high for a developing country. It is also that sector-specific decarbonization, as I said, that cement is very difficult to decarbonize, whereas maybe steel is relatively cheap to decarbonize. So, so therefore, it's you know, and the fact that there are renewables on the horizon is not necessarily the same as saying that the cost of decarbonizing has gone away. And then there was another question which I saw, which in the write-up that I had circulated, I had mentioned that you see, to elicit information from exporters to the EU about the carbon content and then to verify that. Of course, you know, the size of the bureaucracy and things are important, but I think big producers would be somewhat reluctant to share that kind of information and to have that verified by your competing country. You know, and it could be used as a non-tariff barrier, you know, that you said this, but we found something else and things like that. So, you know, it could be the French designating all the Japanese imports at one small port somewhere and use that, you know, as a non-tariff barrier. So that again is a little, it's not a trivial issue.
Yes, so thank you, Partha. And now, Kathleen, is for you to reply and wrap up. This would be the last.
There is still 1 minute.
Reply.
Yeah, to Paola for her first remark. I think in France, it's very clear that people think that the CBAM will be paid by Chinese, basically. And so they are happy with the CBAM. Okay. And so people don't understand general equilibrium effect. They don't understand that it will affect also the purchasing power of domestic consumers, because it's something for that affects abroad. Okay, so you're perfectly right. and it may have distributive effects also at home, but I think it is not very much studied. I don't have seen any study about that. On the alternatives, there are some that have been proposed, like regional agreements. No, not regional, excuse me, agreements on specific products. For instance, there is a global arrangement on sustainable steel and aluminium. Okay, so it's cooperation on specific products, and maybe it could be an alternative, but I must say I don't know very well how it works, so I'm not going to go into that. Yeah, there is the question about the risk of retaliation. I'm not an expert on that as well, but I think retaliation is really very probable. Okay, it's very plausible that there will be retaliation. And so we are in a world more and more protectionist, and where countries are more and more closed, and I think it may lead to things that we are not going to like.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Okay. And Stefano, I leave it to you to
thank you all. It was fascinating, and I think it's just the beginning of a conversation that we will keep on going for the next years, hopefully. And just thank you all the participants, and please check on our website the next webinars. We have plenty of very interesting things. The next one I think is about lobbying in Europe at the beginning of April, but we have many other interesting things coming out. So please check our website, our newsletters. Okay, thank you all. Thank you all again. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye bye. Bye everyone.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Gianmarco. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart and Kathleen. Thank you.